London in the spring of 1815 was a creature of glittering excess. The war with Napoleon had ended, and society had thrown itself into celebration with an almost desperate fervour. Ballrooms overflowed with silk and jewels, with laughter that rang too loud and champagne that flowed too freely. For those with fortune and beauty, it was a season of triumph. For Miss Beatrice Thornhill, it was simply another exercise in endurance. At 24, Beatrice had long since accepted her position in the social hierarchy. She was neither wealthy nor beautiful, neither charming nor well-connected. Her parents had died when she was 17, leaving her dependent on her mother's brother and his wife. Uncle Frederick and Aunt Judith were not unkind, precisely, but they made it clear that Beatrice's presence was tolerated rather than desired. She had no dowry to speak of, no prospects, and, as Aunt Judith frequently reminded her, no particular accomplishments that might compensate for these deficiencies. Tonight's ball at Lady Pemberton's grand London townhouse was no different from a dozen others Beatrice had attended. She stood near the refreshment room, a safe distance from the dancing, wearing a gown that had been fashionable 3 seasons ago. Her brown hair was arranged simply, without the elaborate curls and ornaments that adorned the younger ladies. She had learned to make herself small, unobtrusive, invisible. I shall simply expire if Lord Hartwell does not ask me to dance. A high, affected voice declared from just around the corner. Beatrice recognized it immediately. Lady Georgiana Hartley, the reigning beauty of the season. At 19, with golden curls and a substantial dowry, Georgiana commanded attention wherever she went. "You needn't worry," another voice replied, dripping with syrupy certainty. "Every gentleman here is half in love with you." "Not every gentleman." Georgiana's tone turned sharp. "The Count of Redmond has barely glanced my direction all evening." Beatrice knew she should move away. Eavesdropping was unseemly. But something kept her rooted to the spot. "Oh, him." A third voice joined, dismissive. "He's been abroad for years. Probably doesn't know how to behave in polite society anymore." "He's devastatingly handsome," Georgiana said, a pout evident in her voice. "And wretchedly wealthy. I cannot understand why he wastes his time observing the wallflowers." "The wallflowers?" One of the other girls laughed. "You cannot mean Miss Thornhill?" Beatrice's breath caught. She pressed herself against the wall, willing herself to disappear entirely. "The very same," Georgiana said. "I've seen him watching her. Can you imagine? That plain, penniless creature? She's practically ancient." "Perhaps he feels sorry for her," someone suggested. "Charity and all that." "Charity?" Georgiana's laugh was cruel. "My dear, no nobleman would ever want her. She has nothing to recommend her. No beauty, no fortune, no connections. Those dreadful brown curls, that ordinary face. And the way she reads those tedious books, as if intelligence could compensate for a complete lack of feminine charm. She should accept a position as a governess." Another voice chimed in. "At least then she'd be useful." "Can you imagine?" Georgiana's voice rose with malicious glee. "Miss Thornhill, forever instructing other people's children, growing old and bitter in some draughty schoolroom. Though I suppose it's better than remaining a burden on her relatives. No man of quality would ever offer for her. She'll die a spinster, mark my words." The words struck like physical blows. Beatrice had endured whispers and sidelong glances for years, but never had she heard her worthlessness articulated so plainly, so publicly. Her throat tightened. Tears burned behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She would not give them that satisfaction. She needed to leave. Now. Before they rounded the corner and saw her standing there, before her carefully maintained composure shattered completely. But as she turned, she found her path blocked. Edmund Ashford, Count of Redmond, stood 3 feet away. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered and dark-haired, with grey eyes that held depths of experience. At 31, he had spent years on the continent during the wars, returning to England only months ago. Society whispered about him, his wealth, his title, his mysterious years abroad. Mothers pushed their daughters toward him. Men sought his favour. And he was looking directly at Beatrice. She could not read his expression. His jaw was tight, his eyes burning with something that might have been anger. But surely not on her behalf. For a long moment they simply stared at one another. Beatrice's humiliation was complete. He had heard everything. Every cruel word, every cutting assessment of her worthlessness. Then, to her absolute shock, Edmund stepped forward. He moved with deliberate purpose, his gaze never leaving hers. "Miss Thornhill." His voice carried, clear and firm, cutting through the ambient noise of the ballroom. Around them, conversations faltered. Heads turned. Beatrice could not speak, could not move. Edmund stopped directly before her. The entire ballroom seemed to hold its breath. "Miss Thornhill," he repeated, and now his voice rang out, ensuring every person present could hear. "I have admired you from afar for some weeks now. I can no longer remain silent." What was happening? Beatrice's heart hammered against her ribs. Behind him, Georgiana and her companions emerged from the refreshment room, their faces blank with shock. Edmund took Beatrice's hand. His touch was warm, steady, real. "I would be greatly honoured," he said, his grey eyes holding hers with an intensity that stole her breath, "if you would consent to become my wife." The ballroom erupted. Gasps, whispers, shocked exclamations. Beatrice stared at him, unable to process what had just occurred. This could not be real. Men like Edmund Ashford did not propose to women like her, especially not publicly, in front of everyone who had ever dismissed or mocked her. "Miss Thornhill?" Edmund's voice was gentler now, meant only for her. "Will you do me the very great honour?" She should refuse. This was clearly some terrible mistake, or worse, pity. Perhaps he had made a wager with his friends. Perhaps this was an elaborate jest. But looking into his eyes, she found herself unable to form the words of rejection. "I—" Her voice emerged as barely a whisper. She swallowed, tried again. "Yes. Yes, I will." Edmund's expression transformed. Relief flooded his features, followed by something that looked almost like joy. He raised her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her gloved knuckles that felt like a brand. "You have made me extraordinarily happy," he murmured. Around them, the ballroom buzzed with barely contained chaos. Beatrice saw Georgiana pale as death, her mouth hanging open. She saw her aunt's shocked face across the room. She saw dozens of people she had known for years staring at her with expressions ranging from disbelief to outrage to reluctant fascination. "I shall call on you tomorrow," Edmund said, still holding her hand. "If that is acceptable?" Beatrice nodded, incapable of speech. "Until tomorrow, then." He released her hand slowly, as if reluctant to let go, and stepped back. With a formal bow, he withdrew. Beatrice stood frozen in the centre of the ballroom, the object of every eye, her mind racing too quickly to catch a single coherent thought. What had just happened? And more pressingly, why? The following afternoon, Beatrice sat in the drawing room of her uncle's townhouse, hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had gone white. Through the window, she could see Hyde Park across the street, filled with fashionable people taking the air during the fashionable hour. She had barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Edmund's face, heard his voice declaring his intention before all of society. It made no sense. Men like the Count of Redmond did not marry women like Beatrice Thornhill. Unless a treacherous voice whispered in her mind, they did so out of pity. "He's here." Lady Catherine Monroe appeared in the doorway, a knowing smile on her face. Catherine was Beatrice's only true friend, a widow of 27 who had retained both her independence and her warmth despite the cruelties of society. "Catherine, I cannot do this." Beatrice stood abruptly. "I should send him away. This is madness." "It's a marriage proposal, dear, not an execution." Catherine took her hands, squeezing gently. "Breathe, and perhaps listen to what the man has to say before you decide he's motivated by charity." Before Beatrice could respond, Edmund was announced. He entered with easy grace, impeccably dressed, looking far too self-possessed for a man who had upended society's expectations the previous evening. Miss Thornhill, Lady Catherine. Bowed to each of them. "I hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all," Catherine said smoothly. "In fact, I've agreed to serve as chaperone for a drive through the park. I understand you've arranged a carriage, Lord Redmond?" "I have." His eyes remained on Beatrice. "If Miss Thornhill is amenable." She should refuse, should demand an explanation here in the safety of her uncle's drawing-room. But something in his steady gaze made her nod. "I would be pleased to accompany you." The carriage was elegant, open-topped to maintain propriety. Catherine sat across from them, providing the necessary presence while maintaining a discreet distance from their conversation. As they entered the park, joining the parade of fashionable vehicles, Beatrice felt dozens of eyes upon them. "You're wondering why?" Edmund said quietly. Beatrice turned to him, startled. "My lord, Edmund." He smiled slightly. "Given that we're to be married, perhaps we might dispense with excessive formality?" "Edmund, then." His name felt strange on her tongue. Intimate. "And yes, I am wondering. Last night was unexpected. For both of us, I suspect." He adjusted his grip on the reins, guiding the horses around a slower carriage. "Though perhaps not entirely. I don't understand." "Miss Thornhill, Beatrice, do you recall Lady Hartwell's literary salon 3 weeks ago?" She frowned, searching her memory. "I remember attending with my aunt. She wished to display her charitable nature by including me. I was there as well." Edmund's voice was carefully neutral. "You were in the library, away from the main gathering. Reading Wordsworth, I believe." Beatrice felt heat creep into her cheeks. She had hoped no one had noticed her escape. "I found the poetry more engaging than the conversation." "As did I." He glanced at her, something warm in his expression. "I watched you for 20 minutes. You were completely absorbed, occasionally smiling at a particular passage. At one point you laughed aloud, then looked around as if worried someone might have heard." She remembered that moment. A particularly clever turn of phrase had delighted her. "You were watching me?" I was transfixed. He returned his attention to the horses, but a muscle worked in his jaw. "When Lady Hartwell's companion came to fetch you back to the salon, you went without complaint, though I could see you wished to remain with your book. You treated the servant with courtesy, thanked her for coming to find you. It was notable. I don't see how that constitutes grounds for a marriage proposal," Beatrice said, though her heart had begun to race. "It doesn't. Not alone." Edmund navigated them to a quieter path, away from the main thoroughfare. "But there were other moments. At the theatre, when you defended a young girl who had dropped her fan. At Lady Morrison's ball, when you spent an hour conversing with the elderly Dowager Duchess because no one else would. At the museum, where I found you studying Greek, pottery with more genuine interest than I'd seen from anyone in years." Beatrice stared at him. "You've been observing me?" "Yes," He met her eyes directly. For weeks, and everything I observed made me wish to know you better. Your intelligence, your kindness, the dignity with which you carry yourself despite society's determination to make you feel small. But last night, her voice caught. That was so sudden, so public. Edmund's expression darkened. Last night I heard Lady Georgiana and her companions saying things that... He stopped, visibly controlling himself. Things that were unconscionably cruel. And I realized I had been a coward. I had admired you from a distance, too cautious to approach, too afraid of... He trailed off. Afraid of what? Of being wrong about you. The admission seemed to cost him. Of discovering that my perceptions were false. Before Beatrice could respond, Catherine spoke up from her seat. I believe some refreshment is in order. Lord Redmond, there's a tea shop just ahead. Might we stop? The tea shop was genteel and surprisingly uncrowded. They secured a private table near the window, and Catherine engaged Edmund in light conversation about his time abroad, giving Beatrice time to collect her thoughts. She studied him as he spoke. He was handsome, certainly, but there was something else, a gravity, a depth of feeling in his eyes that suggested experiences beyond the typical gentleman's life of leisure. He spoke of Vienna, of Paris after Napoleon's defeat, of art and literature, and the strange displacement of returning home after years away. You mentioned being cautious, Beatrice said during a lull in the conversation. May I ask why? Edmund's expression shuttered briefly. He glanced at Catherine, who nodded encouragingly. I was engaged once before, he said finally. 7 years ago, before I left for the continent. To a young woman I believed cared for me. While I was abroad, she ended the engagement in order to marry a duke. He smiled, but there was no humor in it. A duke with a significantly larger fortune than a mere count. Understanding flooded through Beatrice. You thought she wanted your title and wealth. I knew she did. She made that abundantly clear in her letter. He looked down at his tea. It made me cautious about women who showed interest. I found myself questioning every interaction, wondering if they saw me or merely my position. But I didn't know who you were, Beatrice said slowly. At the literary salon, I mean. I had no idea the Count of Redmond was even in attendance. Edmund raised his eyes to hers. Precisely. The weight of his regard made her breath catch. He had chosen her not despite her lack of status, but because of it. Because she had treated him as simply another person, not a title to be captured. But you barely know me, she whispered. How can you be certain? I know enough. His voice was firm. I know you are kind without calculation, intelligent without artifice, dignified without pride. Those are rare qualities, Beatrice, rarer than beauty or fortune. She wanted to believe him, desperately. But the wounds of last night's humiliation were too fresh. I am not what society considers a good match for a man of your standing. Society is populated largely by fools. Edmund reached across the table, stopping just short of taking her hand. Propriety maintained, but the intention clear. I care nothing for society's opinion. I care only for your answer to my question. Will you truly marry me? Beatrice looked at him, at the intensity in his grey eyes, at the tension in his shoulders that suggested her answer mattered more than he wished to reveal. She wanted to say yes. But doubt remained, a cold whisper of the previous night's cruelty. I would like more time, she said quietly, to be certain. Something flickered in his expression, disappointment, perhaps, or hurt, but he nodded. Of course, I am perhaps moving too quickly. We shall proceed at whatever pace makes you comfortable. They finished their tea in careful conversation, and Edmund returned them to Beatrice's uncle's residence with promises to call again soon. As Catherine and Beatrice entered the house, Catherine turned to her friend with a knowing look. "You're afraid?" she said simply. "I'm sensible," Beatrice corrected. "Men of his station do not marry women like me unless there is some ulterior motive." "Or," Catherine said gently, "unless they are intelligent enough to recognize value when they see it." But Beatrice could not shake the conviction that Edmund's proposal was born of pity rather than genuine regard, and she could not, accept charity disguised as affection, no matter how appealing the packaging. The following week passed in a strange blur. Edmund called every other day, always proper, always respectful of Beatrice's request for time. They walked in the park. They attended a museum. They discussed literature and art and politics with an ease that both thrilled and terrified her. He was perfect. Too perfect. Which only reinforced her certainty that this could not possibly be real. The breaking point came at Lady Worthington's ball, a week after Edmund's proposal. Beatrice attended reluctantly, uncomfortable with the stares and whispers that now followed her everywhere. She was no longer invisible. Instead, she had become an object of fascinated speculation. The Count of Redmond's peculiar choice. Edmund arrived shortly after she did, immediately seeking her out for a dance. As they moved through the figures, Beatrice was hyper-aware of every eye upon them. "You seem troubled," Edmund said quietly during a turn that brought them close together. "I am merely adjusting," she replied, "to the attention. I regret if my approach has caused you discomfort." His hand rested lightly at her waist. "That was never my intention." "I know." But did she? Doubt gnawed at her. When the dance ended, Edmund escorted her from the floor, but before they could reach the refreshment room, Lady Georgiana intercepted them, her expression a perfect mask of sweetness that failed to hide the malice in her eyes. "Lord Redmond," she cooed, "and Miss Thornhill, how charming to see you both." "Lady Georgiana." Edmund's tone was coolly polite. "I must confess myself quite shocked by your engagement." Georgiana continued, her gaze sliding to Beatrice with thinly veiled contempt. "So unexpected. One cannot help but wonder—" "Wonder what?" Edmund's voice had gone dangerously soft. "Oh, merely at your motivations." Georgiana's smile sharpened. "It's quite noble, really, to take pity on someone so unfortunate, though I do hope you don't come to regret such a charitable impulse." The words hit their mark. Beatrice felt her composure begin to crack. Pity. Charity. Exactly as she had feared. "That is quite enough," Edmund said, steel in his voice. But Georgiana had already turned away, rejoining her companions with a triumphant smile. Beatrice could not breathe. The ballroom felt too hot, too crowded. She needed air, space, escape. "Beatrice," Edmund began. "Excuse me." She pulled away from him, moving blindly toward the terrace doors. She heard him call her name, but did not stop. Outside, the night air was cool against her flushed cheeks. She moved to the far end of the terrace, gripping the stone balustrade with shaking hands. Footsteps behind her. Edmund's voice, careful. "Beatrice, please, let me explain." "There's nothing to explain." She did not turn around, could not bear to see pity in his eyes. "Lady Georgiana is correct. This entire situation is based on your charitable impulse. You saw me humiliated and felt sorry for me. I understand. It was kind of you. But I will not marry out of pity." "Pity?" Edmund's voice rose with something that sounded like genuine anger. "You believe I proposed out of pity? What else am I to think?" She spun to face him. "Be honest with me, my lord. Before that night, had you any intention of offering for me? Or did you act purely because you witnessed my humiliation?" Edmund stared at her, jaw tight. I acted because I could not bear to hear you spoken of so cruelly when I knew. He stopped, running a hand through his hair in frustration. I had been planning to approach you properly, to court you in the traditional manner. But hearing those words, that cruelty, I could not wait any longer. So it was impulse. Pain lanced through her chest. It was necessity. He stepped closer. Beatrice, I have spent weeks observing you, admiring you, working up the courage to approach you. Yes, their cruelty prompted me to act when I did, but not because of pity. Because I could not let another moment pass where you believed yourself unwanted. How can I know that's true? The question emerged as a whisper. How can I believe that a man of your station would genuinely want someone like me? For a long moment, Edmund simply looked at her. When he spoke, his voice was low and raw. You cannot know, just as I cannot know if you might come to care for me, or if you will always see me as the foolish man who proposed out of obligation. He paused. Perhaps we are both too wounded to trust what stands before us. He bowed slightly, formally. Forgive me for pressing you when you have made your feelings clear. I will not trouble you further. He turned and walked back into the ballroom, leaving Beatrice alone on the terrace, her heart in pieces, uncertainty and regret warring within her. She had wanted honesty, but now that she had it, she felt only loss. 3 days passed. 3 days during which Beatrice remained at home, claiming illness. In truth, she felt sick, but with regret, not fever. Edmund did not call, did not send notes. Society whispered that the engagement was off, that the Count had come to his senses. Beatrice told herself this was what she wanted, what she had asked for, freedom from the charade. But her heart called her a liar. On the afternoon of the 4th day, Lady Catherine arrived unannounced. She swept into Beatrice's room like a force of nature, took one look at her friend's miserable face, and sighed. We need to talk, Catherine said, settling into a chair. And you need to listen. Catherine, I don't— Hush! Catherine held up a hand. I have known you for 3 years, Beatrice. I have watched you endure cruelty and dismissal with dignity that would shame saints. But in all that time, I have never seen you be cruel to yourself until now. Beatrice blinked. I don't understand. You are so convinced of your own unworthiness that you cannot conceive of someone seeing value in you. It's not Edmund's regard you question, it's your own worth. The words struck like a physical blow. That's not— It is. Catherine's voice was gentle but firm. Do you remember Lady Hartwell's salon, the one Edmund mentioned? Of course. I was there too. I saw him watching you in the library. I saw his expression. Catherine leaned forward. Beatrice, I have attended hundreds of society events. I have seen attraction, calculation, boredom, and everything between. What I saw on the Count of Redmond's face was fascination, pure, genuine fascination. He barely knew me. He wanted to know you. There's a difference. Catherine paused. I've observed him at subsequent events as well. Always his attention returned to you. Even when Georgiana and her ilk tried to capture his interest, his eyes followed you across rooms. That is not pity, my dear. That is interest. Beatrice felt tears prick her eyes. But why? Why would he? Because you are worthy of interest, of affection, of love, if it comes to that. Catherine took her hands. You are kind, intelligent, thoughtful. You have integrity that half of society lacks. The question is not why Edmund might care for you. The question is why you refuse to believe you deserve to be cared for. The tears fell then, and Catherine held her as she wept, for years of dismissal, for accumulated hurt, for the fragile hope she had crushed before it could fully bloom. What if I've ruined everything? Beatrice whispered. Then you fix it. Catherine said simply. If he matters to you, you fight for him, even if fighting means swallowing your pride and admitting you were wrong. Before Beatrice could respond, there was a commotion downstairs. Raised voices, one of them distinctly masculine and familiar. Catherine raised an eyebrow. Well, it seems the gentleman has saved you the trouble of deciding whether to seek him out. They descended together to find Beatrice's aunt in a state of agitation, trying to bar Edmund from entering the drawing room. My lord, she is indisposed, Aunt Judith was saying, her voice shrill. It would not be proper. With respect, madam, propriety has never been my primary concern. Edmund's voice was firm. I will speak with Miss Thornhill. Now. Beatrice stepped into view. It's all right, Aunt Judith. Edmund's head snapped toward her. His expression was a storm of emotions, hope, desperation, determination. Beatrice, I apologize for the intrusion, but I will not allow you to believe. He stopped, visibly composing himself. Might we speak privately? Aunt Judith sputtered, but Catherine intervened smoothly. I shall serve as chaperone. Come, let us adjourn to the garden. Fresh air will do everyone good. The garden behind her uncle's townhouse was small but pleasant, with budding spring flowers and a stone bench beneath a tree. Catherine positioned herself at a discreet distance, and Edmund turned to face Beatrice. I have been a fool, he said without preamble. I have mishandled everything from the beginning. My proposal was impulsive. You were right about that, but not for the reasons you believe. Beatrice opened her mouth to speak, but he held up a hand. Please, let me finish. He took a breath. When my former fiancé ended our engagement, I made a vow never to let anyone close enough to hurt me again. I would marry eventually. Duty demanded it, but I would choose someone safe, someone who could not wound me. He began to pace, agitation clear in every movement. Then I returned to London and saw you. You reading Wordsworth and smiling at verses you found clever. You speaking kindly to servants who others ignored. You maintaining grace and dignity while society treated you as if you were invisible. He stopped, turning to face her directly. And I realized I did not want safe. I wanted you. You who saw people rather than titles. You who possessed more integrity in your smallest finger than most of society combined. You who made me feel something beyond the numbness I'd cultivated. His voice dropped, became almost vulnerable. I spent weeks working up courage to approach you properly, to court you as you deserved. But when I heard those women, heard them reduce you to nothing, heard them mock the very qualities I admired, something broke in me. I could not let another moment pass where you believed yourself unwanted, because you are wanted, by me, desperately. Beatrice could barely breathe. Edmund, I know you fear I acted from pity, but Beatrice, I was terrified that if I approached you, you would reject me, that you would see only my title, or worse, that you would see me and find me wanting. The proposal, public and impulsive as it was, came from fear as much as anything. Fear that if I did not speak immediately, I never would. Fear that you would slip away before I could tell you that watching you exist in the world has become the most compelling thing in my life. He moved closer, and she could see the rawness in his eyes. You asked how you could know my feelings are genuine. I have no proof beyond my word. But I can tell you this. I have been proposed to 24 times since returning to England. Beautiful women, wealthy women, titled women. I felt nothing. But you, with your quiet dignity and genuine kindness and fierce intelligence, you make me feel everything. I have been unkind. Beatrice said, her voice breaking. To both of us. I was so certain of my own unworthiness that I could not accept the possibility that you might truly see value in me. You are not unworthy. Edmund took her hands in his. You are extraordinary, and I am asking, begging if necessary, for another chance. A proper courtship. Time to prove to you that my regard is real and lasting. No more rushing, no more grand gestures, just us. Getting to know one another. Learning if what I feel might eventually be reciprocated. Beatrice looked at their joined hands, at his face etched with hope and vulnerability. She thought of Catherine's words, "Why you refuse to believe you deserve to be cared for. Perhaps it was time to believe." "I was wrong to doubt you," she said quietly. "Or rather, I was wrong to doubt myself. You have shown me nothing but sincerity, and I repaid you with suspicion born from my own wounds. Can you forgive that?" "There is nothing to forgive." His hands tightened on hers. "We have both been hurt by the past, but perhaps together we might build something better than what came before." "I would like that." She smiled, tentative but genuine. A proper courtship. Time to know one another without the weight of society's expectations. And Edmund? Yes? I think I would very much like to know you better, because what I have seen thus far— She paused, gathering courage. "What I have seen has made me feel things I did not believe myself capable of feeling." The relief and joy that flooded his expression stole her breath. He raised her hands to his lips, pressing kisses to her knuckles with reverence that made her heart race. "Then we begin again," he said softly. "Properly this time." "Yes." She met his eyes, allowing herself, finally, to hope. "Properly." And there, in the small garden with spring flowers blooming around them, Beatrice Thornhill and Edmund Ashford began what they had both needed from the start. Not a dramatic rescue or a grand gesture, but simply the chance to see one another clearly, without the distortions of past pain or present fear. It was, in its quiet way, the beginning of everything. 6 months later, in the library of Ashford Hall, Edmund's country estate, Beatrice curled in a chair by the window, a book of poetry open in her lap. Autumn sunlight streamed through the tall windows, painting everything gold. She was not reading. Instead, she watched her husband at his desk across the room, managing correspondence with the efficient focus she had come to admire. They had married 2 months ago, in a small ceremony that prioritized meaning over spectacle. Society had been scandalized by the modest affair, but neither Beatrice nor Edmund cared. What mattered was the vow they had made, standing before God and the few people who truly loved them. Married life suited them both. The initial awkwardness had given way to comfortable companionship, punctuated by moments of surprising intimacy. Edmund had been patient, allowing her to adjust to her new position, never pushing for more than she was ready to give. But lately, she had found herself wanting more. Wanting him. A knock interrupted her thoughts. Thomas Ashford entered without ceremony, his cheerful energy filling the room. "Brother mine," he announced, "I bring news from London. Prepare yourself." Edmund looked up, eyebrows raised. "Good news or scandal?" "Both." Thomas grinned at Beatrice. "Lady Georgiana has married. An earl with more debts than sense. Apparently he proposed after knowing her for precisely 3 days. The gossips predict disaster within a year." "How unfortunate," Beatrice said, and was surprised to find she meant it with genuine sympathy rather than vindictiveness. Her old life, with its hurts and humiliations, felt distant now. Irrelevant. "Also," Thomas continued, helping himself to brandy from the sideboard, "society has finally stopped gossiping about your marriage. Apparently, the Duke of Ashworth's gambling debts are far more interesting. Your yesterday's scandal. Congratulations. A relief, Edmund said dryly. He rose from his desk, stretching. Will you stay for dinner, Thomas? Cannot. Promised Mother I'd return before nightfall. Thomas finished his drink and moved towards the door. But Beatrice, a word? Walk me out? Curious, Beatrice set aside her book and accompanied Thomas to the entry hall. Once out of Edmund's hearing, Thomas turned to her with unexpected seriousness. He's happy, Thomas said simply. Truly happy. I haven't seen him like this since before everything. Thank you for that. Beatrice felt warmth bloom in her chest. I think we make each other happy. Good. Thomas smiled. He deserves it. You both do. He paused at the door. Also fair. Warning. Mother is planning a visit next month. She's delightful but relentless. Be prepared for questions about grandchildren. Heat flooded Beatrice's cheeks. Thomas laughed, clearly delighted by her reaction, and departed with a jaunty wave. Beatrice returned to the library to find Edmund standing by the window, watching the sunset paint the countryside in shades of amber and rose. He turned when she entered, and something in his expression made her breath catch. Come here, he said softly. She crossed to him, and he pulled her gently into his arms. They stood like that for a long moment, her head resting against his chest, his chin atop her hair. She could hear his heartbeat, steady and strong. Are you happy? He asked, the question barely audible. Beatrice pulled back just enough to look up at him. I am, more than I ever imagined possible. Are you? Incandescently so. His smile was tender. Though I must confess I still sometimes cannot believe you're truly mine. I could say the same. She reached up to touch his face. When I think of that night at Lady Pemberton's ball, how close I came to refusing you, but you didn't. He turned his head to press a kiss to her palm. You took a chance. On both of us. The best decision I ever made. Edmund's eyes darkened with emotion. Beatrice, He stopped, swallowed. I love you. I should have said it before now. I have loved you since you smiled at that verse in Wordsworth, though I did not know it then. I love your kindness, your intelligence, your strength. I love the way you see the world and the way you have taught me to see it differently. I love you. Tears sprang to Beatrice's eyes, but they were tears of joy. I love you too. So much it frightens me sometimes. I never knew I could feel like this. He kissed her then, soft and reverent, and she melted into him. When they parted, both were breathless. There is something else, Beatrice said, suddenly nervous. Something I should tell you. Edmund's expression grew concerned. What is it? She took his hand and placed it gently against her abdomen. For a moment he simply stared at her, uncomprehending. Then understanding dawned, and his face transformed with wonder. Truly? His voice was almost reverent. The physician confirmed it yesterday. I wanted to be certain before I told you. She watched his reaction anxiously. Are you pleased? Instead of answering, Edmund swept her up in his arms, spinning her once before setting her down carefully, as if she were made of glass. Pleased. Beatrice, I am... He seemed unable to find words. You have given me everything. A home, a partnership, love, and now this? He knelt before her, pressing his forehead gently against her stomach. Thank you, he whispered, for all of it. For taking a chance on a fool who proposed to you in the middle of a ballroom, for seeing past my clumsy attempts at courtship, for choosing me. Beatrice ran her fingers through his dark hair. Always, she said, I will always choose you. Edmund rose and kissed her again, deeper this time, filled with promise and passion and profound tenderness. When they finally drew apart, the sun had fully set, leaving them in the gentle darkness of the library. "Do you remember what Lady Georgiana said?" Beatrice asked softly. "That no nobleman would ever want me?" Edmund's arms tightened around her. "I remember. She was wrong." Beatrice smiled up at her husband, at the man who had seen her when she believed herself invisible, who had valued her when she thought herself worthless. "You wanted me. You chose me. Not despite who I am, but because of it. And I would choose you again," Edmund said fiercely. "Every day for the rest of my life I would choose you." Outside, stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Inside, wrapped in her husband's arms, Beatrice felt a peace she had never known. The girl who had once believed herself unworthy of love had found not only love, but a partnership built on genuine regard, mutual respect, and the kind of intimacy that came from truly seeing and being seen by another person. Lady Georgiana's mocking words echoed in her memory one final time. No nobleman would ever want her. But Georgiana had been wrong. A nobleman had wanted her, had pursued her, had married her, and more importantly, she had wanted him in return. In the end, that was the greatest triumph. Not that she had been chosen, but that she had chosen herself worthy of being chosen. And in doing so, she had found everything she never knew she needed. Edmund led her from the library toward their private chambers, and Beatrice went willingly, her heart full, her future bright, her past finally laid to rest. She was loved, she was valued, she was home. And that, she thought with profound contentment, was the happiest ending of all.